Okay, let's start with Alice Poole, and I think you'll be able to unmute yourself, Alice. If not, I just unmute you.
Yes, thank you. I have. I have a question I'd like to be able to also grow a little bit of a vegetable fruit type garden, but I'm wondering what I can use as a cover crop or green mulch between the rows of vegetables and fruits.
So I believe that's for Janine.
Beg your pardon?
That's for Janine. Janine Cullen.
Anybody who's wants to answer.
This is Janine, do you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't, there's the master, I don't know if Nancy's on, the master gardeners have a whole list of plants that are great to put in between your vegetable garden. Radishes, there's clover, we have a pretty nice list of things that you can add to your garden. So I would reach out to the master gardeners. They'll give you a short list, and frequently throughout the year, we even give out free samples. So.
And we also have a really great vegetable series coming up, and it's asynchronous through Virginia Tech. So if you want to send me an email, not everybody, just you, and berlin@vt.edu, and we'll send you the information on that class and cover crops.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jennifer Adams, you got your hand up. You want to unmute yourself? There you go.
This is a question that came up for me after watching the soil session, but I would be interested in anybody's opinion about this. When you're doing a native planting, what is the opinion about tilling? How does that affect the soil structure? Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? Because I've read many opinions. Thank you.
Is Dan still on the still here, or did Dan Schwartz have to take off?
I don't know.
I think he left.
Okay.
So I would say then I'll just jump in, right? I'm not a soil scientist, but what I'll jump in is that at least when we're working in a lot of restoration and conservation contexts, right, we're trying to approach the site sort of as is, right? So I think that this is one of these sort of discussions, and maybe John would want to hop in with how this might relate with some of the invasive plants. But if you have some kind of native plant component that's already there in the landscape, whether that's some of your trees, and we now have a better understanding of how tree root systems work, that most of the important smaller roots that are gathering water and nutrients for the tree are actually outside of their drip lines, that is wider than the canopy. That we may be seriously disrupting some of these things by tilling too much. So I think the way to approach some of these things is, what's the least amount of disturbance that you can do to a landscape to get the kind of ecological value that you want to see out of it, right? So it's not to say that tilling is always the wrong choice, or that it's always bad or something, but that we may want to approach that where we're looking at sort of first lines here, a little bit like what Sam Drogi talked about in his thing, where, okay, let's just try putting down wood chips and then see the result that we get. And then if you still have serious invasives pressure, you kind of can use these other tools in the toolbox to kind of ratchet up the pressure on those things. But at least that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think Matt hit the nail on the head. I'll just add that when Park Authority is looking at our restorations, the standing environment, when we approach that area, weighs heavily into our methodology, and soil testing is always a component, and if we're making soil amendments, that has to be considered as well. So for example, if we were restoring a heavily degraded pasture land that had been abandoned for a number of years and was dominated by things like red cedar, autumn olive, and calorie pear, we might be more open to doing tilling and more disturbing activities to amend the soil and establish a meadow environment. But working in a forested environment, we want to ensure that we're not disturbing the mycorrhizal and rhizomal networks in those systems, which could result in impacts to trees or overall impacts to the ecosystem. So we would perhaps want to tread more carefully in those situations. Again, I'm also not a soil scientist, but anytime you're making adjustments to your soil chemistry or even the structural component of the soil, in tilling like that, make sure you get your soil tests, and, talking to a soil scientist would definitely be the way to go. I know Virginia Tech has a lot of good resources there.
Jennifer,
Thank you.
go ahead. Jennifer, I'll just put in, when I'm usually planting to bring natives into either a reforestation project or even in my own yard, I'm not tilling. I'm simply opening up enough soil to get the plant in and then closing that back up again. I don't think there's any need to do any greater disturbance for those purposes. Even when we're doing a really large reforestation, we don't do any kind of a till. So I'm not sure if you're thinking about some other sort of planting type like seeding versus putting in plugs or a container grown material. But if I were doing just container grown material, definitely would not till.
Thank you all.
I'm going to put the vegetable class in the chat, how to get to that, okay?
Okay. All right, Sue Pueblo, you are next.
Elaine. Thank you. I have about 10 acres of pasture that we're working on encouraging the natives, and we've done I think a great job in ongoing battling various invasives. But right now I'm struggling a little bit with natives that are too aggressive, and namely we've got probably an acre that's become almost all winged sumac, and then whole big stands of dogbane. And I understand they're both native, so I don't want to do anything crazy, but is there a time of year to mow? We've actually gone out and cut seed heads off the dogbane, but I know they spread by rhizomes. So is there a way to discourage the super aggressive natives?
Can I ask a clarification? What is it you're trying to move toward?
We have butterfly weed, we have Joe Pye, we have all kinds of goldenrods and asters, all the other stuff that's prettier and just not as aggressive, maybe. I mean, I'm not going to get rid of all of the dogbane and winged sumac, obviously, because it has its purpose, but it really seems to be taking over.
So you want to maintain more of a meadow condition, or it's maybe a
Yes.
combination of meadow and shrub.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted clarification. Everyone wants to tackle that question. Go right ahead.
I just have a little tiny advice. Editing it out. I mean, just cut, what Sam Drogi was talking about with the weed whacker, turning it on its side and just editing out the aggressive ones. It's so much work though. I understand.
I would say that, at least for the dogbane component, that as you get more of the sort of mid to late successional components of a meadow established, things like your goldenrods, things like your warm season grasses. I know Nancy Berlin posted a list of really great kind of medium height sort of grasses that play well with other species, that you tend to transition away from these native, or in some cases non-native sort of species that really, really thrive on disturbance. So you will move away from things like ragweed and dogbane and things that tend to emerge very rapidly post some sort of disturbance in an open area. Not everything that emerges right after disturbance is something you want to get rid of, so you may find that you get a lot of partridge pea, and that's really cool. And that's an annual that needs a little bit of open soil somewhere to kind of get the seeds back down and come back up. As far as the sumac, that's kind of the other side of the kind of succession point there, right? So a meadow kind of eventually, absent some kind of disturbance, whether that's us mowing it or a sort of natural burning kind of thing, all of that is eventually going to want to close back up into some kind of forest. So, sumacs may be a part of that. We talked about red cedar earlier today too, kind of doing that same thing. And so that's sort of a management decision. And so you might find that you want to leave some sumac, there's big advances. We do some work in the Dominican Republic too, with like silvopasture and stuff like that. So, you know, if this is a pasture in the sense that you have animals in there, having some tree cover can be beneficial for allowing them some access to shade. So you may select some healthy looking stems for the sumac, and other than that, you know, maybe just once a year you cut some of the stems back that are closing up the meadow too much. But I think that fundamentally it's about a sort of management decision about what you want that meadow to look like, whether you are going to have some of those kind of successional woodies be a small to even a large component, or you just want the herbaceous stuff in there. But yeah, I would say that at least for the dogbane, I wouldn't even worry too much about it. Plant the other stuff in and it'll tend to take care of itself.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to Tom.
Okay, thank you. Often I seed a large area, and by large area I mean like maybe 10 by 10 feet, which is probably not large for most of you. And I make sure I put you know, a few inches of topsoil uniformly, and to the eye it looks uniform, and the same thing about spreading the seed, and that looks uniform too. But in every case, there's always patches that don't grow. So I'm wondering what could be going on there. Nothing in several patches. And what should I do to reseed them? Or is there some special treatment I need to consider? Or maybe a different grass seed. I've been using tall fescue.
Nancy or Matt, do you want to tackle that?
Sure. I would say, at least from the perspective of tall fescue, I don't have any experience growing that. You know, the sorts of grasses that we're looking to grow, you know, obviously that isn't a native species right here, but it also grows a little bit in a different way. So most of our grasses that we're looking to grow in a restoration context are bunch grasses. You know, so some of these species have different kind of times of removal or emergence in terms of being warm season or cool season. So when you sow can have an impact. As far as an uneven sow, because sometimes we have uneven results when we sow things in the greenhouse. So sometimes just some of your seed isn't very good and you get a dud batch. One thing to consider is, are there any kind of even very small sort of gradients in the rise and fall of the landscape, the kind of topography there? When you're working with very small seed, you know, it has that seed and you know, the seedling as it emerges has water needs, and if the soil surface isn't moist when that seed emerges, you can get a lot of failure out of that, because as the seed goes to drop moisture from a just emerging root out of that seed, you know, it's not very far. It may only be a centimeter or so into the soil. So, you know, making sure you have some of that. Some of it may just be washing off of slopes or tall spots too. And so the seed is germinating, but it's germinating down lower where you have a swale. And also when you're wild sowing things, and you know, this is obviously true of native stuff as well as non-native things. When we talk about once it's established, one of the big benefits of why we want our native grasses and things back out into the landscape is so wildlife can make use of that. And part of that is eating the seed. So if you throw down a whole lot of seed, a portion of that is going to become food for birds and other things to eat. And so, you know, some of that, maybe it's in, you know, it's nearby a tree that birds are hanging out on. It's a little bit more of an open spot. So, you know, you may be having some amount of that just being eaten up too. But I would say specifically for fescue, I don't know the particulars of that plant.
Okay, well, you brought up something I never considered, like a different type of seed. Where would I find native seed that might be better? Or should I perhaps go to the Earth Sangha site? Do you have different seeds I should look at?
So we don't sell any seed ourselves, in part because we're wild collecting all this seed, and we don't want to place an undue burden on any of the populations that we're collecting from. So we want to collect just as much as we can to grow out the plants, because those plants, once they get back into the ground, are much more likely to do well. than, broadcasting seed, but also it means that, the amount of seed you need to restore an area, if you're kind of growing them out versus just kind of throwing them down is greatly reduced. So we have that as part of our agreement with Fairfax County Park
Okay.
Authorities and other landowners.
Okay, I'm not familiar with your site. That's why I thought I'd ask. But what kind of seed should I be looking at to maximize its native qualities?
It's going to depend a lot on what you want out of your site and what the site looks like. There's no just kind of one size kind of fits all for that. And also, if you're considering sowing fescue because there's a recreational value, there's some other thing you want out of that, I would recommend getting in touch with the cooperative extension folks. I know we have a few of them here covering a few areas.
Well, I have, and I've done the soil analysis and all that. They recommend tall fescue. So if that's not working in these patches, what else should I do? And I was told that I could only seed in the fall. Is there a seed I can get that would do something in the spring?
There are probably a few species that you can sow in the spring and get some result. Often a lot of those are annuals. I would recommend fall sowing for most things. But yeah, I can't make any specific species recommendation without knowing more about the site and what you would want it to look.
I just want it to be green.
Tom, if you want to send us a picture of the site with a description of the sun exposure to the master gardener at pwcgov.org, we can help you problem solve with some native ground covers, perhaps. And you also, I mean, I've run into construction debris buried beneath the surface too that has created some problems. But
well, I've dug at least a foot into it.
Okay, then probably not.
4 inches of topsoil, and I've had the master gardeners come out several times.
Uh-oh.
And
I'm gonna move us along because we've got some other questions here. I think Tom would contact the cooperative extension, and they can help you out and point you in a better direction.
Well, okay. I just want to say I've done that before. Okay, I'm done.
We had another question on the chat about whether or not there's recordings. Yes, there will be recordings, the video recordings that will be available probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. So we're going to hit our 2:30 mark. We actually just hit that. If people don't mind staying, we do have some more questions. We understand if people need to leave, but I think as long as there's some folks that want to stay on, we'll try and hit some more of these questions if that's okay. One question is from Sandy. We're converting 1 acre that was cut for hay into a meadow. We are 100% organic. We had planned to burn and then seed with a native plant seed mix and planting some plugs. Should we cut it short instead of burning? Got a lot of meadow questions here.
I missed the very beginning of that question, so I heard the cut it short, my audio.
They're converting 1 acre for a meadow to a meadow, and they had planned on burning, and then seeding with native plant seed mix and putting some plugs in. So the question is, should we cut it short instead of burning?
John, what do you think?
So I'm thinking about this one. There's a critical component to this question that needs to be addressed, and that is, can you safely burn on your property? Do you have the tools, experience, and people to safely burn?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, then if that's the case, Fairfax County we implement frequent prescribed burns on our property. I don't know about the specifics, but the fire cycle or burn cycle or burn schedule, whatever that would be typical in this area, wouldn't be uncommon to have a burn either implemented naturally or by the indigenous peoples of this area, for meadow area. I think it's once every 2 years or even more common than that. I don't have the reference in front of me, but yeah, I think if you can safely do it, we implement prescribed burns on pretty much all of our meadow restorations that we're able to do. So we use them for the similar purposes for what you're describing. We also use them for structural purposes, for like coarse woody debris that might be on site or remain at the meadow or on the meadow. But yeah, that safety training component is going to be the most important. I don't know if anyone else has any opinions who may have maybe a more seasoned meadow specialist than I am, but yeah, we frequently burn on our properties.
I'll at least just jump in to say that, you know, I've been on a lot of the meadows that FCPA has burned. They look really, really good. I think regardless of what way you decide to manage the landscape, working on that timing is going to be kind of crucially important. You know, you may find that you don't want to do that annually, that you may go every 2 or even 3 years to do that, and that may have you know, some benefits there. There might also be some trade-offs involved in terms of having shrubs and trees kind of creep back in, and how much pressure there is from that kind of woody succession there. But what we found is, you know, when you have that right timing, you know, and you have some of that stuff left up all winter, not only does there seem to be more reseeding of some of those species, kind of the natives that you want, but there seems to drive a lot more wildlife into that habitat. So you get more interesting things kind of making use of that space. You know, you will probably want some very like specific on-site expert advice from people who do burnings, which is unfortunately not me, you know, to manage some of that landscape, just based on seeing what specific species you have, native and invasive, that are on that site, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, think about what wildlife species you're managing for. If you have a target community that you're trying to support, we have a couple meadows where we're trying to promote, you know, grassland bird species like grasshopper sparrows, and we've seen, you know, more occurrences of those following, you know, a prescribed burn regime. But, you know, consider also the structural components of the meadow and how whatever organisms you're aiming to promote specifically might utilize that system. So for example, you know, for some of our bird species, you know, we try to incorporate retaining, if you're going to burn, retaining things like snags or some remnant vertical structure for perching purposes and things like that.
Okay, I'm going to go on to Kathy in just a minute here, but before I do, we didn't announce this in my talk, so I'm just going to repeat it here. We have an evaluation for those who are still online here. In the chat, you'll see under Nancy Berlin's initials, please fill out this evaluation to help us plan the future symposium. There's a link there. If you haven't done that already, please download that so that you can fill that out. We very much pay attention to what people who've attended say about what was helpful or what they'd like to see in the future. So please do fill that out and help us out. Okay, Kathy, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. I can't see you all, but you could see my picture. My question is about neighbors who want to convert their lawns to native plants. And I have been researching it for months, and I've also talked to the Cooperative Extension and the Master Gardeners and read their articles, and I have not found what my neighbors keep asking me for, and that is a native plant that grows or can be mowed to 3 inches. And they have a variety of shade, partial shade, and sunny yards in the coastal plain. I get what they're trying to do, and because I keep posting about native plants, they really, really want to get on the bandwagon, but they want to have an area that can take moderate foot traffic. And I've been pulling my hair out trying to think of plants for them. And I've got some like violets. I've got a few suggestions, but if you all can think of some that I can recommend that what they're trying to do is replace their lawn, but have a lawn. Like the guy earlier said, he wants it green. I know I've been telling them not to plant turf grass because I said, Maryland, from what I've read, we are in a zone that is not cold nor warm. So we are in this like this line where we can't grow turf grass in our area, in the Piedmont kind of coastal plain. It won't grow here. So stop trying to do that and plant natives. And they're on board with me. And then they say, okay, so now what do we plant instead? And I'm like, I don't know.
Any suggestions? Or let me just ask, is this a shady area or a sunny area?
Some of them have shade, like our particular lawn. There are times of the day where it's sunny, where it's open, but then along the edges, it's wooded. So some of my neighbors have like one who's just completely replanting with natives. Her house was rebuilt and the whole front yard is sunny. And she's put down a cover crop for now of red clover, I think it is, an annual. But pretty soon spring's coming and she's going to want to start planting. And I don't know what to tell her to plant.
So I'm not sure if Nancy Berlin is still on here, or Matt, or Nancy Viers is still on here. Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, I have some initial thoughts. So I guess to directly address the core of your question, right, is that I don't think that there are a whole lot of things that tick all the boxes of being native, have a very wide sort of set of habitats that they can grow in, don't get very tall, and can resist, a lot or a moderate amount of foot traffic. But the first thing that jumps into my head that can at least tick most of those boxes is path rush. I will say it's not a particularly, exciting plant, and it will be probably fairly patchy. You can fill in some of those gaps with the violets as you suggest, but in pretty heavy foot traffic, the violets probably won't persist. What I would say though is that, and again, this can be a hard sell for folks that aren't, all aboard this, but that one of the best things that folks can do is if they're converting a large section of their yard, or they look around their yard and they're not anywhere close to that kind of 70% mark that we talked about with Doug Talamy's research. I talked about at the beginning. I know John Burke mentioned it in his breakout session, that converting areas to a more diverse cover, having, garden beds, maybe they're raised beds, maybe it's, expanding a woodland edge or something, is going to have a really, really big positive ecological outcome. Whereas if they're just keeping mowed areas and they're transitioning that from non-native turf to a native path rush, that may be a sort of very modest sort of gain in ecological value onto that site. So I would say going after that kind of low-hanging fruit, even if it means tackling less total area, you're building up kind of layers of habitat. We've heard from Sam Droby about why you will want some of these herbaceous plants that flower at sort of, taller to medium sort of heights to attract some of these specialist bees. So I understand the impulse, but I would say too that, we have that there's an opportunity for, at least in certain areas, to build back some habitat structure. And those are certainly what I would target first, rather than doing a whole lawn replacement.
You are always so insightful, Matt.
Well, happy to help.
Thank you.
That was a really good answer. There's nothing that will fill all the boxes for sure, but I've successfully used the common yarrow, and it will take some foot traffic and a small
Common yarrow?
Killium millifolium, a straight species, and it's ferny looking. It stays green all winter. It holds the soil because it has rhizomes, but it's not going to fill in a huge area. It'll take a long time. But that path rush, I put Juncus tenuis in the chat. That's a good suggestion. I've used that too, Matt.
Mm-hmm. And what about plantain? We could do that. Can be mowed.
Yeah, we do have native plantains, that is Plantago species. For anyone who's not familiar with our native plantains, they are not close relatives of bananas. But low growing sort of things. We have a few native ones and a few non-native ones. They can be a little bit difficult to suss apart at first. I see in chat someone suggesting sedges too. We do have some great sedges, but a lot of the ones that I think could resist foot traffic are not good kind of lawn replacement ones. And the ones that I think make attractive and appealing lawn replacement things don't resist foot traffic very well. I know designers love using things like, say, Pennsylvania sedge. We don't see a ton of Pennsylvania sedge in the wild around here. It certainly is out there, but it does tend to be in some of the drier and shadier portions. I don't think it would tolerate full sun, and certainly if your yard's sort of wet, I wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome. And it looks like, Jerry, did you have another question?
I do. I wanted to thank everybody, but I'd like to move us from the more intimate. I have 100 questions that could help my property, but I want to raise the larger question. We're living through the 6th great extinction, and we can't live in denial. And so I want to ask the question, the state of Virginia has the largest budget surplus. It's the county of Fairfax, where I live, will have a very large budget surplus. How do we all individually and collectively address the large need? We shouldn't be just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and trying to figure out 10 square feet of property or 100 acres when the whole of the planet is at risk. And we all are perhaps the best people to want to accelerate the preservation of native species and deal with the climatic changes that are all too manifest around us. So how do we get, this 4th meeting and maybe the planning for the 5th to begin to think about greater degrees of political advocacy, really attain a paradigm shift from the knowledge base that everybody has warmly shared and expressed into meeting the very urgent large needs of our global community, but our Northern Virginia community as well. Tough question. I don't have an individual answer, but I do a lot of advocacy in the state legislature and in our local county to really advance much more of our work than we seem to be doing. And I want to just instill a sense of urgency that we all need to pull together to do a lot more. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jerry. I'll speak as somebody who's on the planning for this event and just say, I think we all sense a need of us, have a sense of urgency and the need to improve our environment and to address the loss of native plants and the loss of habitat and the loss of forests and various things. But I will say that as we plan these events, we have a fairly defined focus, and that our goal is really to try and reach, although because we're online, we're reaching people from all over the place. We've even had people from Canada take part in this event. But our focus really is to try and reach our local communities with a message of improving our local habitats and the things that we can do as individual landowners to improve our own properties. And we think that that has a tremendous amount of value to address some of the questions you're concerned about. But that's our focus. Our focus is to reach out to our local communities and spread a message of the value of native plants and that how we can do things on our own with our own properties that can actually make a difference locally. So I'm sure we're going to continue with that and in future native plant symposiums. So with that, I'm just going to say I think that's pretty much the last question.
If I could just touch on what Jerry said real quick.
Sure.
the one thing that, we obviously talked a lot about the kind of positive action that everyone can make in their own yard, and that's real. If people commit, we will create ecological value in these gardens, and if enough people do it, it will connect up. What I would say is that in terms of kind of beginning to see that sort of sea change that I think we all want to see, we have to advocate for a change in how we perceive our urban and suburban landscapes. We have a lot of infrastructure. We have a sort of baseline social acceptability that monocropping turf grasses in your front and backyard is the best, and in some cases the only way to manage the landscape. That is the perception that a lot of folks have. And the more that we can change that to accept the diversity of how our suburban and urban landscapes on private property look, whether that may be entirely treed, whether that is a diverse kind of meadow, or even, some like front yard, like farming and gardening of actual foodstuffs, that we begin to kind of open up and diversify what our landscape looks like. I think we're going to see a lot of environmental benefits to that. So to the extent that folks here are on HOA boards, are willing to talk to folks about changes to zoning rules and things like that, I think that's going to be a very, very important piece. I think critically, that's something that's achievable on a local scale and will have a meaningful positive contribution. I know Fairfax County is already doing things like this with its natural landscaping plan. Department of Public Works and Environmental Services is working on building out bigger groups of kind of stakeholders for preserving their urban forests. So some of this is happening behind the work. The more that the public wants to sort of advocate for more of this stuff, it makes it easier for the folks who are working behind the scenes to get that kind of stuff done.
All right. With that, I think we're going to say we are done for 2022. I want to thank all of our speakers for being here as part of our planning team. We so appreciate everybody coming in and contributing to a really wonderful set of topics with a lot of people with very sound knowledge and the ability to communicate that. Thank you so much for everybody who came. We appreciated having such a large crowd. I think we had over 320 or so participants, and we hope that we can put together a program for our 5th annual Native Symposium that is just as appealing to you all, and come back and learn some more, and bring your friends and bring your neighbors. All right, so everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you.